Arai Guma by Marc Yamaguchi. Chapter 8, Ray, Part 3. Severn hated being called a butcher. He despised the rape and pillage mentality that had plagued movements before. He wanted the Severnites to confront the scarcity of resources with precision and calculation, and those who yielded would be spared. By incorporating more raccoons into the economy, Severn could proselytize them. After all, demand was nothing without supply. He was a statesman, he was sophisticated, and he superseded his savage ancestors by manipulating systems for his own gain. Severn's reign would be an affront to nature that perpetually impoverished his species. Rachel could not indulge in such thinking. As she and Ray approached Severn's chamber and the vault where the green wheelie was kept, Rachel turned to her brother for guidance before taking any further steps. She wasn't sure, but she thought she had made out the contours of another raccoon leaning against the wall not far from where Severn was sleeping. Ray was having second thoughts about leading Rachel to the green wheelie, but he couldn't back out now. Look, Rachel had made her own bet. She would be caught, and she could plead for forgiveness from Father. Severn would make sure Father kicked her out for good. At that moment, Rachel caught wind of an opportunity. An older raccoon, probably the father of a failed pledge, appeared to make a desperate move. Rachel telegraphed to Ray to look at what was happening to the rotation of the sentries. The old raccoon was trying to slip past them undetected, but Seth emerged from the shadows and nabbed him in the antechamber. Rachel and Ray thought they could hear Seth browbeat the sentries and then warn them about distemper. He turned his attention to the dejected-looking raccoon. It was crazy to think he could enter Severn's chamber. He must have been suffering from madness. It was a fine line between madness and courage, but Rachel was determined to make the turn. Severn was startled by the disturbance, but Seth had the situation under control. He knew to call Ray's father in case they had to eliminate the perpetrator and evacuate. Only the walkies were a greater threat than distemper. Naively, Ray thought it was cool his father was called to take the prisoner captive. In truth, security protocols dictated that Severn and Seth be protected at all costs, which meant even the other advisors were expendable. Once Ray's father gave the all-clear, Seth, Severn, and the inner guard joined them in the open pledging area. Ray's blood raced with excitement, for he had never seen a takedown before. Certain that Rachel would be impressed with the police work, he suddenly realized he was talking to himself. He looked around frantically until he saw something in the direction of the antechamber. Rachel had made it into Severn's chamber and had mounted the green wheelie. As soon as Rachel could make eye contact with Ray, she gestured for him to come quickly and assist her. Ray was trembling after he ran through the antechamber unimpeded. It was too good to be true. As far as he knew, no one but Seth had ever been inside Severn's private chamber. It wasn't ornate, but it was cavernous and could house an entire company of raccoons. The vault was located very close to what must have been Severn's resting place. It was a recessed area that prevented Rachel's voice from echoing and giving away their position. "I've got both my hands on the handle, but I need leverage. I'm not heavy enough to do the turn alone." Rachel was panting. "We've got to work together." Ray dreaded the possibility the inner guard would return any moment, and he worried his father would disown him for breaching security in such a sensitive area. Worse, Ray's father might be indicted for Ray's insubordination. Ray began to freak out because it dawned on him he had brought a female whose pheromones could turn the Severnites' lair into a powder keg. Rachel hissed at him to snap out of his mental anguish and tip the green wheelie on her count. It was almost anticlimactic when the bin fell over and Rachel popped open the lid. Rachel had concluded that despite the weight advantage of all the young adult males, no raccoon could open the green wheelie independently. With Ray giving her the push she needed, she timed her fall with the force of gravity. Her grip never wavered, and the acrobatic swing of her body made the turn possible. Rachel and Ray stood for a moment, stunned by what they had accomplished. The noise they had created had not fallen on deaf ears, however, and Seth recognized another crisis in the making. Severn was too groggy to guess the old raccoon was a decoy, but Seth's eyes sharpened. He yelled at the two advisors to quit laughing at Ray's father, who looked clownishly oversized next to the scrawny raccoon in his custody. "Fools! Get back to our master's chamber now!" Rachel heard Seth too, and escaped just before the advisors arrived to witness the open green wheelie next to a disoriented Ray, little more than a spectator, caught up in a whirlwind of events. Seth soon stormed into the private chamber, but his claw fell short of cutting Ray. Severn had caught his paw mid-swing and held it until he disarmed Seth's rage. Severn's stare communicated his thanks and also reestablished his position as the alpha. Seth would not bite the hand that fed him, the hand that had mastered the turn. Once he regained his senses, Seth began to think how absurd that this boy had opened the green wheelie on his own. Had there been an accomplice? Meanwhile, Severn was on another tangent and began to think the disorder was something serendipitous. "How delicious!" Severn gushed. "You really can't teach an old dog new tricks. He's as clumsy as an ox. But what do we have here? The precocious pup achieves the impossible. He opens the green wheelie right under the noses of my, highly trained security team? The future, Seth, belongs to the youth." Take 2 sentries and escort the old-timer to the detention block. This was code for termination, but pledges were spared the truth of Severn's doublespeak. "Ray, my boy," Severn glowed, "you have exceeded everyone's expectations and now become the commander of your father's battalion." Ray was quite taken by Severn's overtures, but stopped short of celebrating with his father, who wore a long face. Ray's father said nothing and felt disappointed he wasn't present when his son accomplished this incredible feat. It was a poignant moment, and yet Ray's father felt obsolete. Severn appeared to have become his boy's father figure. Perhaps it was karma. He was losing a son to Severn. Ray's father used to scoff at the other fathers who were too proud of their son's abilities. Now, he had to admit, he empathized with them because they had sacrificed their sons, had them conscripted to the Severnites. When he noticed Ray was staring at him, he pulled himself together and stopped second-guessing himself. The Severnites were pragmatic. They would achieve the greater good, and they would make believers out of more raccoons yet. The green wheelie's inner contents were spilt in plain view, and the sentries had begun to salivate. Claiming the booty was the furthest thing from Ray's mind, because he was preoccupied with fraud complex and fear. When Ray met his father's gaze, his eyes expressed a vulnerability he had never seen before in his father. He couldn't imagine commanding his father in battle. He didn't know a thing about fighting tactics. He didn't know any pledges well enough who would protect him from harm. Not like his family. And where had Rachel gone? Would she be caught? Was she okay? Severn wouldn't let Ray shy away or feign humility in his accomplishment. Severn needed a poster boy. His sentries didn't need convincing. They were already battle-hardened. But almost all the pledges had been protected, even hovered over by their families, who had pinned their hopes on their sons to succeed in Severn's de facto military academy. More problematic was that they lacked grit, which meant they could turn tail at the first sign of blood. At last, Severn had his solution. Ray would play the part of a young commander who, with just his presence, could prevent companies from splitting into disarray. While Ray beat the drum of war, Severn could direct his forces as visionary and brigadier general of the Severnites. Seth found all this nauseating. He hated how Ray's father was now untouchable because his son was being groomed as the Severnites' hero. As Severn became consumed with propaganda, Seth stepped up as party whip. If Ray's father hadn't helped his son open the Green Wheelie, someone else had. Seth quietly ordered 2 sentries to round up the best trackers of the inner guard. He pretended to do a customary recon due to the earlier intrusion, but his focus was to catch Ray's unknown accomplice, deliver the truth, and be vindicated.